Alright, folks, welcome to part 2 of my Hunter from Bloodborne fan art. Yeah, so as you can see, we're a little further along. I've decided to speed these workflow videos up a little bit because, I don't want to make videos of myself drawing stroke for stroke. That would be kind of boring for you guys. So you'll notice as this goes along that the video has been edited, and we will be skipping some parts of it, skipping forward, so it's a little more succinct, a little more brief and to the point. So I'm still working on line art here, and at this point I'm way loosened up, and I don't care as much about mistakes as I did in the first part of this. I'm just going with it and trying to make the piece as organic as possible, because as I mentioned before, your feeling during the process while you're drawing really comes through in the drawing. I really like these strokes I'm doing here because they're subtle, but they define the form of the thighs. That wasn't in the initial underlying sketch. I don't know if you folks can see it, but underneath the harder, darker lines, there is a sketch of the hunter, a really rough sketch. Normally, I would just keep that sketch and paint right over it. As I mentioned before in my first video, my style lately has been very sketchy because I've just been looking to, pump out work and just get that practice in. But I really wanted to do this hunter fan pick, this hunter drawing justice. So I did a sketch underneath first, and then another line art on top, which is what I'm doing here. To be 100% honest, this is not the style I intended initially, and I'm going to do another one, and I think that'll come out better, and it'll be more indicative of what Bloodborne feels like, which is kind of this dreamlike, not completely solid world. There's something very exaggerated about it. This is way too comic-y and way too realistic. The next thing I'm going to do, I think, I will not use thick black lines, and I think I'll just go with more of a painterly concept art kind of style, and I think that'll evoke the feeling and mood of Bloodborne more. And when I think of this piece, certain movies come to mind, certain movies that are not so great, which is a common occurrence with horror action movies that do get made, like the recent Dracula. Not really that recently, but I don't know, I can't remember what year it was, but it was the Dracula movie where Dracula was basically a superhero, and he was Vlad the Impaler, and they gave him a really sympathetic background, and it was a good-looking movie, great atmosphere, but characteristically, with regard to the characters, it didn't land. Therefore, it wasn't that interesting because Dracula is not a sympathetic character. It's like trying to make a lion sympathetic. A lion eats; it feeds on blood. It's a cannibal. It's not a cannibal. Sorry, a carnivore. So a good story about Dracula should embrace what it is, what he is. There's been quite a few games that also evoke this vibe, like Castlevania, the remake. I had high hopes for that. Apparently, that had I think Hideo Kojima produced that. And I really don't like that game, even though it had a lot of potential. But once again, the atmosphere was really good. But I wasn't a fan of the Belmont. That's the lead character. I wasn't a fan of his character design at all. He had this red leotard and with a cross on it. But then again, the recent Castlevania TV show on Netflix, I believe by Warren Ellis, the comic book writer, who's also just basically a writer, that's pretty good because you can see they're trying to do something original. It isn't too heavy on the action and really emphasizes character development. So, in that sense, it's a really good show. I prefer the first season to the second. The second, there was just a little too much character stuff going on, and a lot of the more plot-centric stuff happened later on in the season, which is great to see in an animated piece, in an animated show, right? But I wasn't really that interested. Like, there was a lot of character development, the relationship between Belmont and that magical girl. I don't know what her name is, and I really didn't care for that too much. I found her kind of naggy. But anyway, those are some interesting TV shows, movies, or cartoons that I think embody that dark action fantasy aesthetic. So what I'm doing here is, this is something I've been doing lately. It's kind of a new thing, and it's something that evolved over all my years of drawing and painting and illustrating, is creating depth. Actually, here I'm being very lazy because as you watch, as the video goes on, I start actually painting in the character, but here I was like, I just finished the line art and I was feeling kind of tired, and I just wanted to create the effect, the ultimate effect that I was going for when the piece is finished, which is create depth. And that's what I'm doing. See, I create in this here several layers, and I change the opacity of the different layers to simulate depth, right? And I find it very effective, and I really enjoy doing this stuff. But you'll see the greater effect later on in the video when I actually paint in the character and paint in some highlights and dark colors and contrasts. It really shows. It really shows the character kind of popping out of the page, popping out of the mist. It took me a while to nail down this style, but I wasn't. It came unconsciously. I wasn't really thinking of how can I create more depth, but because I often did it with different ways. Earlier on, I used to change the opacity of my brush, which is not a great idea because every time you hit the pad, it changes, especially if you already have a layer underneath that. So it creates this kind of rough, sketchy effect, which is good in itself, if that's what you're going for. But this is more solid and more consistent, where I have layers with different opacity. That way, I can control the layer opacities and therefore control the depth. I find it more effective and more to the point. I can manipulate that, and I can change it however I want at any time, instead of drawing on the mists or the fade or the something to show that the character, a part of the character, is further away than another part of the character. So it's something new. Probably like my last 10 illustrations, I started doing this. I find it works very well. I'm enjoying doing that. Yeah, so here I am, as you notice, and the funny thing, and something I really enjoy about drawing, especially when you're in the process, you learn so much, especially if you're paying attention. I think Frank Frazetta said this to Ralph Bakshi, because Ralph Bakshi, he's the guy who did the animated Lord of the Rings movie long ago, before Peter Jackson's movie. It was the very first Lord of the Rings movie I ever watched. It was amazing to me. It was rotoscoped. Rotoscoping is where they use real human beings, live action, and then they draw over that live action footage, and then they draw over that. And this guy had this whole production of a bunch of people dressed up like elves and this Aragon and dwarves, and then they drew over it. And if you haven't checked that out, you should really give that a watch. It's really fun, especially if you're an artist. Really, really great stuff to see. The very first Lord of the Rings by Ralph Bakshi, Bakshi Studios. But anyway, Ralph Bakshi was a huge fan of Frank Frazetta. Ralph Bakshi also has a great movie titled Fire and Ice, which also used the same rotoscoping method, and all of the character designs were done by Frank Frazetta. Frank Frazetta is basically the father of the fantasy style of art. You know, when you see Conan standing on a hill with a half-naked woman with a lion or tiger right beneath him, and then a bunch of goblins coming up to him, that's Frank Frazetta. He created that style. So Frank Frazetta did the character concept and designs and world designs for this Ralph Bakshi production called Fire and Ice. And during their relationship, Ralph Bakshi took art lessons from Frank Frazetta, which just warms my heart because I just wanted to be there. I just want to take lessons from Frank Frazetta because, you know, just like Ralph Bakshi, he saw that this guy was a genius. But anyway, during the time Frank Frazetta gave Ralph Bakshi art lessons, one of the things he told Ralph Bakshi to remember is to always think while you're drawing. You know, it shouldn't be a completely unconscious process. And I kept that in mind, and I paid attention to what I was doing while I was doing it. And that's how this new creating a depth of field method with the opacity and the layers came out for me, because I would draw and then I would create layers and then start painting with the background color over it and changing the opacity to create this level, different levels of depth. And during this process, as you noticed, while the piece was still line art, I started doing that without filling in the character itself. That's something that I'm going to keep doing from now on. But this was the very first time I started doing that, because all of a sudden I have those layers set to go. As you can see now, they're not on. I've turned all those 3 layers off. There are 3 layers of different opacity levels, and I've turned them off, but they're there now. And you'll see towards the end of this video, I would turn them back on, and they'll sit right on top of the filled-in, fully painted character, and the effect is great and very satisfying. So always be aware, pay attention while you draw. You know, it's an active process, and I don't think that can come without you having drawn a lot. You have to draw a lot so that you're not worried about your technique, about your draftsmanship, and you're really just exploring. You're not worried about anatomy, but you've reached a place where you can draw comfortably, and also let your mind wander during that process, and let your mind keep your mind open to see what works and what doesn't work. All right, folks. Thanks for watching. Stick around for part 3, and that'll be coming up very soon. Thank you, and have a good one.